Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar from Builder. This is our Builder Labs series. We're going to be covering how to build an app dashboard with AI-powered design to code. So who are we? I'm Josh Thomas. I'm a product manager of AI services here at Builder. I am a PM, but I was a developer for about 20 years before transitioning over to product. So hopefully I can do some justice to the developers who are on the call watching me speak right now. And with me, I have Alexis.
Hello. So I am a solutions engineer on the pre-sales team at Builder. I get to work with a lot of cool folks who are trying to use our products and, particularly recently, Builder Develop for all sorts of use cases. So today we're focusing on a really specific use case, but really excited to hear from you all. And yeah, if folks want to drop hellos into the everyone chat, we'll go through some housekeeping and agenda items next. So first things first, if you've been to the previous lab series, we're going to do an intro to what we're covering today. If you're not familiar with the product, we're going to walk through what the product does and where we start and where we end up with Builder Develop. Then we're going to have the step-by-step lab for this. And finally, we'll end with a Q&A between both of us. So any questions you have, please put those into the Q&A function so we can get upvotes on those, so we can sort and answer those later. We will be keeping an eye on the chat as much as we can during this. So if you do want to drop something for everyone to see, feel free to say it. But the questions in the Q&A function would be awesome to help us keep that organized. So thank you all. And I think we are ready to roll on. Anything else, Josh?
Yeah, one thing. Alexis is actually going to show something a little later, which is our beta flow. So this is a new super exclusive flow for how to go from Figma to code. I think that when she shows it, you'll probably be surprised and amazed. She does a great job. And if you stick around to the end, we're actually going to post a form where you can fill in your details and we can give you access to the beta flow within your own Builder accounts. So stick around, watch the demo piece where she goes through the beta flow, and then we'll be able to give you access.
All right. So let's get started here. So for the Builder Develop product, what we're going to do is get started on the left-hand side of this diagram. So we're going to start from Figma. We have a sample design and we have our Builder Figma plugin installed. And so what this plugin is going to do is invoke our proprietary AI models to prepare our design file, import that design into Builder, and make the design responsive in the visual editor. So this is something that Josh is going to demo. I do want to give a few notes about our proprietary AI models. So these are fully built and trained internally, and they're hosted on Google Cloud, as is the rest of our application infrastructure, and that's to ensure privacy and data security. So at that point, after we've got our design imported into the Builder application, which you can see in this big fun purple box right here, we can use the visual editor to tweak our designs, or we can go straight into the code panel to generate the code for the design. So once we've moved into that code generation stage, we're going to involve some finely tuned external large language models to help out at this point. These can include things like Anthropic Claude, for example. But another quick note here, while we talk about those external large language models, is that we do not train these third-party LLMs on customer data. So privacy, security, always top of mind here. And once we've got that code generated, you're going to see that we have a little bit of an arrow in terms of the syncing to the code to the application. This is the point that you're going to be able to write that code to your local project and begin playing with this locally, begin developing further. So in a whole, going left to right, a pretty straightforward flow. And, Josh, I'll invite you to add anything else from a high level you see here. But this is what we're going to walk through today with a little extra fun around that private beta we plan to roll out later.
I think one of the interesting aspects of it, and I'm going to call it out now rather than later, is that we actually experienced some issues this morning with one of our LLM providers. And fortunately, I was able to go through and still test and show how to use Figma-to-code to my local machine, just using the models that we have without actually needing to go to our LLM providers. And I'm actually going to show that when I get into that demo portion of it. But I think it's important to call out at this point because we can see how our models flow into the app and how the code generation occurs before feeding into the LLMs, which give us a better version of the code that's more likely to fit within your own applications.
Yeah, that's a good call out. It's not just a wrapper around external large language models, but there's more at play here.
Absolutely.
All right. Oh, and this is actually something I do love to talk about because we see so many different use cases with this tool and so many different workflows that teams go through. We did a use case in our last webinar that was focused around building a React component. Maybe that was going to be used for more of an external facing B2C application because it was a form collection component. But today we're going to be focusing on the second use case, which is building internal portals and dashboards. Of course, this can help out with the third use case that we often see, which is maximizing the adherence to your enterprise organization's design system. But we can also use Builder to help create and expand a new design system, or maybe a design system that's just getting started, right? So these are some of the common use cases that we're seeing with special focus today on that second use case.
Yeah, and I think one of the important call outs here is that although we're covering just the second use case, you'll get a good understanding of how we can apply to the other use cases as well, just by the coverage of content today. All right, and that's it. So let's get into the lab and let's actually look at some code and see how this works. Okay. So right now we're looking at Figma, and this is a design that was built using the Cloudscape design system, which is something that was open sourced by Amazon. And in this example, we have this dashboard that probably fits well within most of your organization's internal applications. And I want to show how you can take what exists right now and do the most straightforward path without any component mapping, without any extra work, but just go from Figma directly to code. And that's because I want you to be able to see when you start doing component mapping, the value that that provides to developers as well as designers. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. We'll bring up the Builder plugin and ensure I'm in the right space. And we can see that it's already recognized that there are 42 different components used from our design system in this design. But let's just go directly from Figma to code. I'll export to code. Doesn't take very long. Great. Now let's take a look at it in Builder. Great. So here we go. This is a representation. This is actually code. It's a representation of what it will look like when we go directly to the code on my local machine. We can see that I'm able to make some edits to this as well before I go to code. And you can see it's pretty close. We won't say it's perfect yet, but it's pretty close. And we can look at how this fits into different breakpoints. And it's okay. I'll say that. We can look also at the representation from layers. So how it's represented in Figma to how it is represented in Builder. And in Builder, you'll notice that this is actually much closer to what it's going to look like when it goes directly to the code on your local machine. Alexis, did you have anything to add to this?
You know, one thing is that sometimes folks will say, I only want to generate the code for a specific component, or, how does this layer representation necessarily help me in terms of that output? If Josh wanted to, he could select a layer that contained purely the chart component and generate the code for that component in and of itself. But we can also do the full screen all at once. And so I think
That's a
something that
great
can
point.
also, yeah,
Yeah, I
is
didn't even
that,
think of showing that, but yeah, I was just going to show how to do the entire screen, but you can actually just choose portions of the screen as well. So if we were to go over to the develop tab here, which is really taking it from what's in Builder directly to code, we can see that I can choose these different items. Now, if I chose just this and did to code, it would create a representation only for that single layer that's been selected. And if I select nothing, it's going to create a representation for the entire piece of code. Here we can choose what frameworks, what styling, and what language we're using. So in the example I'm going to show, it's a Next application, and it's using React and Tailwind and TypeScript because I refuse to write JavaScript anymore. But also we can see that there's another thing in here called instructions. Now, instructions are a way for you to provide guidance to the LLM. Not only is it going to look at the code, it's also going to use the instructions as context, which will let you give information to the LLM as to how you want the code to look or to act. I think my favorite one to look at here is accessible code. And we can see some of the guidance we've given to our LLM when we're generating the code. We're telling it that we want it to be WCAG compliant. We want it to use semantic HTML, have interactive elements, have ARIA implementations for labels. And these are things that you need, especially in modern web applications. You need to make sure that your code is accessible. And if this gives you a leg up on that, that's great. We're not going to say that this is all you need to do, because anyone who's worked in accessibility knows that that's never true. But this will give you a step in the right direction, at which point you can review and decide how far it's taken.
And I think, Josh, too, one cool thing to call out at this point is that we do often work with orgs that have lots of different teams of developers working across maybe the same space or even different spaces connected to their design system, to different projects. You can share custom instructions across a team. You can also keep them personal if it's something that you're still experimenting with or it's unique to your project. So there's options for collaboration within the tool that can be handy to call out. And even just a couple of other use cases I like to mention at this point are things like styling frameworks. So maybe if you're using Bootstrap, if you're using Material UI, if there are prompts or tweaks that you want Builder to incorporate as it's generating the code and you experiment with them in the prompt tool, which I'm sure Josh is going to show, then you can absolutely incorporate those for all future code generations. So they're applied by default.
Definitely. And I'm just going to go ahead and generate now. Let's go ahead and generate code based on this, and we can just see how it works. And I'm not going to use this code right now. I don't want to put this in my code base. I actually want to go through and show the version where I'm mapping components. And that's the point where I'll bring it into my code base. But I just want to give you an idea of how the LLM understands to separate the code, create separate components for it. It creates a structure that it thinks will fit best based off of the framework that you've chosen at the time. All right, great. So we have a preface. We have a starting point. Let's go ahead and take this a step further now. And what we're going to do then is we're going to take this and start mapping components. So I have a series of mappings already set up, but what does that actually mean? Well, looking at this design, we can see here on the left in the layers that there are these pieces that are like squares that are on their side. I don't know what a better term for that is, but that's what I'm going to say. And if I choose those, we can see that here on the right, that actually references a published component library in Figma. So in this case, that header is coming from a design system, and we can choose that and see what the different versions of this header actually look like. Give it a second. There we go. And this header specifically has different types. So if we were to choose like a button, we can see that this button has types. It has state, it has visual context. And as I change those, it changes how the button appears. And this is what designers build when they create design systems in Figma. They create the design system, they share it across the organization, and it's a basis for how to build other pages within applications or build entire applications. So I'm going to go ahead and, understanding that, we're going to choose my other space, where we can see that I have way more components mapped. So here there's 42 available. Great. Drop to 28. So we know that we're going to map at least 14 components. Now, what
And
does
one
it
little
actually,
Oh,
go ahead.
one thing, Josh, before we
Yeah.
even move on from this point, I'll just say that I like to call out for folks is that as Josh switched between his spaces, that's actually a way that you can connect between different design systems. If your organization was using multiple, if you're using different versions, if you're working on entirely separate projects, you can keep a logical isolation between those as it's handy for your teams. And so just as Josh is doing to, keep a logical distinction between his unmapped and mapped designs, it can also be, employed on an organization basis to maintain that organization. She says twice in one sentence, but hopefully that's helpful as you think about the way departments can be structured.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out because when we publish the mappings, right, they're isolated to a space, which is
Right.
really a way of saying it's isolated to an application. So you don't necessarily need to have the same mappings for the entire organization, right? The mappings are based off of the context of the application you're working on, the team you're working on. Great. So let's go over to the design system tab of the builder plugin, and we can see that there's a command here in order to map more components. And we can also see the components that I already have mapped. Great. I don't want to go too deep into that. I think that I'd probably rather just show the code that's used for that mapping process. But first, let's go ahead and go back to builder. So I'm going to export to code. Give it a second. Great. Okay, here we go. So it looks a little bit different now. And that's because this is probably a better representation of what the code actually is going to be and what it looks like in Figma. And that's because we're mapping components. So if we were to go and do this visual preview, okay, here's the design at this breakpoint. We can go to tablet. We can see how the top navigation changed. And that's because this is actually code coming from my local machine in the mapping as to the representation of that component on the view that we have in front of us. All right, now I think I've showed most of this before. Let's go back to develop and let's see what the code looks like now. And I can generate code here and we can see it go through and build all of the different files that are going to be corresponding. You can see that I'm using components now. But I'm going to stop that actually. Let's go take a look at what I mentioned I was going to show earlier, which is maybe a hidden feature. We have two different modes. So quality mode is where we interact with an LLM in order to generate code that looks like it's more likely to fit in your local code base, following the processes and instructions that you have. But we have something called fast mode. Now, if I were to generate this code in fast mode, it's immediate. And that's because the code's already been generated. And the code we're seeing now is what has been made by our own models before it's ever gone to a large language model to be cleaned up. And I can actually use this code as is. And I'm going to do that because I don't know if there's going to be another outage from my provider right now because of what I had earlier. So I'm just going to be safe and use this code. So I'm going to sync it. I have this command. And great. Now let's go to VS Code. And we can see that I have next application here running, just a simple hello world. And I've already synced this once before, but you would just execute this command and then it would ask where you want to place the file. And I already have the file here. So I'm just going to reference that. Here's the my component file. And we can see that it's importing components that were already within my system using top navigation, and it's using the mappings as I would expect. So I'm going to take this component and add it to my page. right? Now let's go back to the browser and look at it. Nice. Here we go. This is an interactive view of it. This is no longer just a flat content. This is using the components that are available from my design system, and we can see how they're interactive. Alexis, do you have anything to add to this piece of it? I know that you do this demo more often than I do.
For this portion, I mean, I do like to note that the interactivity that's coming out of the box here, if you're thinking about the way to do multiple screens, this can actually reduce the need to import each screen because you're going to see that Josh got the drop down purely from importing the one set of layers that he imported. If you've got, multiple screens or, Figma, thinking of the words here, just Figma design showing some of that, you can often accomplish the interactivity through just a single import. So I think this is a really streamlined and quick way to get it into your local host so you can refine and tweak further. And especially for wireframing and prototyping, this can be a pretty fast way to do so. Even though I'm super excited to show you all the CLI flow that I think even has some extra bonus features that make that really, really sophisticated. But no, nothing further that I would say beyond that.
All right.
And
Well,
really just a quick way to drag and drop it in.
I know that you're chomping at the bit to get to your portion, so I'm going to try to hurry. So I've talked about the component mappings quite a bit, but let's actually look at the code and understand what that means. So let's choose maybe the button, right? So I have button. Let's look at a representation here. Okay, we can see that I'm using the button. It has variants defined. One says normal, one says primary. If we were to go back and look at the page, we can see these are the two buttons I'm actually talking about. The one that says last month and last week. Now let's go look at the Figma code. And we can see that here's the button. This says last week. We can see that it is coming from our design system. And we can see the types here. And this one is type of primary. This one is type of secondary. And looking at the code, we can see that it says normal and primary. So not exact same naming, but what we've done is we create a mapping that is a representation of how a component lives in Figma, how the component lives in your component library in React in this case, and how those two pieces fit together. What's the surface area of the two APIs? And we create a translation layer between the two so that anytime I do an export that is using one of these components from Figma, and I want it to map to a component I have in my component library, I create the mapping and I don't ever have to worry about it again. So let's look at the mappings. And I'm specifically going to look at the button mapping. So we can see that one of the mapping items here is it created a TypeScript interface called Figma button props. And we can see that the type here is of type with different options, state with different options. Let's go back to Figma. Type with the same options, state with the same options. Now, this isn't something you actually have to do by hand because I can choose this plugin. And whenever I run this command, it's actually going to generate a lot of the code for me, understanding what is available from Figma. So there might be a little bit of changes I have to make, but I don't believe I actually made any changes to this one. This one is directly from the code generation. So we can see that here's the button, the representation of it from my design system, and variant maps in this way. So if the term primary comes from Figma, it's using primary lowercase in React. If the term is secondary in Figma, it's using normal lowercase in React. And this is how you may not have a guarantee that everything is a one-to-one relationship between a representation in Figma and a representation in your component library, but that's okay because we have a way of mapping the two. It could be a one-to-many relationship. It could be a many-to-one relationship. It doesn't really matter, as long as you have a code mechanism to sync between the two.
One thing I might add here, Josh, if you don't
Yeah.
mind me saying so,
Oh,
is that, something that I've heard from folks when they're looking at, using this tool is, okay, that's great. I have some local components, but I'm also pulling components from external packages. So similar to the way that we're actually pulling components from the Cloudscape design system. How do I manage mappings across local and external packages? And does that introduce any complexity into the process? And the great answer is that it's essentially the same, regardless of where those components are being used. There are,
definitely.
some best practices for exporting those components and making sure they're available within your code base for mapping, but it does not change the mapping process. And build or develop can pick up on which external packages you're using and then map to those components contained within those systems.
Yeah. And I would actually say that in a lot of cases, we would expect the the teams that are creating the design system, who are probably also the ones who are creating the corresponding code, can include those mappings in the code. So as they export it, it doesn't have to be recreated for every team. It can be created on a organization level and then distributed to the teams. And I'm actually going to show a diagram of here in a second, which will make more sense. But that's all the code I wanted to show, Alexis. I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to show, or
I
you're
think
just
this
ready to show
is
your portion.
Yeah, I'm always hustling to get to my portion of the demo, but no, I think this is good. And actually, kind of pulling back and level setting around the way that we see builder develop sitting within an organization, especially one that may already have an existing design system, would be a good next step. And then we'll quit just talking about it and get into another lab specifically around that beta functionality we're throwing out there, if that sounds good.
Definitely. So this is an overview of what a design system use case looks like in an organization. And typically there's a centralized team in most companies. It might be federated across an organization, but more and more we're hearing about centralized teams that have a sole responsibility for design systems, at least in sizable enterprise companies. And that team is responsible for creating the component library as it lives in Figma, and the component library as it lives in the framework of choice of the organization. It might be web components, it might be React, it might be Angular. It doesn't really matter. But as that code is distributed through probably NPM or Artifactory or JFrog or something internally, that that design system library is also distributed. But the way that it's distributed is through Figma. So different designers can use that source design system in building out the designs for the applications they work on, in the same way that developers would pull from that centralized component library to build from the applications. So normally what you have happen is a front-end developer or a full stack developer sitting between what is provided by a designer in Figma and what it needs to look like when it goes to the application and what that code representation is. And they're usually manually taking this process, right? They're looking at it in Figma, identifying what is a component based off the knowledge that I have. How does that convert based off the variants that have been chosen? And there's an easier way. And that's when you include build or develop in the process. So it doesn't really change the initial setup or workflow. You still have this central design team that is responsible for building the library and the component library. It's just that there's an extra step here. So if they actually include the component mappings in the design system library that distributed to NPM, whenever we get down to the point where the developer actually needs to look at Figma, understand how the representation in Figma goes to code, they can use the component mappings that have been published by the central team. And that conversion to code is as easy as what we showed today. You can ensure that the quality is very high because it's using the components that have already been built and verified by the rest of your organization. And the designers who are responsible for it are going to have a much higher degree of uh, happiness, we'll say, knowing that the resulting design uses all the components that they put work into building. Alexis, do you have any questions about this or anything to add?
I love this diagram. You know, I think the only thing I would add here is just similar to what Josh was saying. This does, of course, lend itself to that third use case we talked about commonly, which is, you know, we have an existing design system, maybe even multiple design systems, and how do we increase adherence to that across the organization? You've spoken about it, you know, from the designer's perspective and from the developer's perspective as well. But just making sure that everyone's getting value out of the design system is something that I think this tool can be incredibly handy for. And that it's also streamlining the boilerplate code creation, whether that's for internal applications like this or, you know, even external, as we've discussed in other webinars, just trying to make everyone's day a little bit easier through the means that we can so that these teams can work together more smoothly. Um, just the high level that I think really comes out of this to me every time we talk about it.
Absolutely. All right, it's your time.
All right. I will now officially steal the screen share if you don't mind.
Yep. Let me
And
stop sharing my
let's
screen if I can find it. Maybe.
oh, here we go. I can replace it. We're good.
Oh,
Okay.
perfect.
Two developers figure out how the context of Zoom works. There we go. Okay,
Got
everyone
it.
protect your retinas. I have my local host running and it is very bright, very hello world. Same project repository that Josh was running previously, but I want to take you through a different flow. And this is the one that we've been teasing this whole time. So this is going to be the CLI flow. And so you see, this is my local host. Like a magician, I want to show you my hands before I do the magic trick, just so you could see that everything's the same as Josh was using previously. We are using the cloudscape design again. And of course, I do have my design system mapped, so we are going to see that view of the mapped design come over. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm actually going to click this export to code button, and I'm not going to go into the visual editor, the builder dashboard afterwards. What I'm going to do is use the CLI command that's being provided to me right here. And if I pop open my terminal, you'll see that we have my project repository running. I'm going to paste this in. And what this command is going to do is basically prompt me in the same way that Josh was doing via custom instructions to a certain degree. So it's going to say, okay, how does this design integrate into your project? What context do we need to know about the way this integration is going to work? So let's just say add the design to my homepage. Yeah, that'll. And I'm being prompted if I want to add this additional context file. I'm just going to skip that for now, and we're going to see that that analysis starts. So in the same way that Josh had gone into the builder dashboard, he'd taken a look at the design, he had kicked off that develop code generation portion by selecting his frameworks, by selecting his styling, applying some default instructions. I'm not actually having to do any of that at this point beyond that initial prompt, because what's happening in the background right now is that Builder knows the context of the project repository that this is running in. It knows what language I'm using, it knows the framework, it knows what styling, and it also has a sense of the components that already exist within this project repository. And so to me, the really cool thing I love about the CLI method is that it's going to take that contextual awareness and create output that has that in mind. And so when I run to my local host, whoa, we have this already integrated, which is not to say that the initial process through the visual flow took a long time, but I've got everything that we were looking at previously, and I've got that available right now. And if I were to go back to my Figma design and make an update to that design, I could actually rerun this command and it would only do the delta of what's changed between that Figma design to what I'm asking to be integrated here into my project repository. Because if I accept this, let me just pop open my code editor itself. What we're going to see is that it's using the context of what I've got here. And so all these components that I already had are just being imported into my new homepage. And then similarly to what Josh had gotten as his code output, we are going to see that hello world of my local application be replaced with this actual dashboard design. But any future Delta imports I want to do from this point, this context is going to be able to feed into that because I've now got it in my project repository. So once again, I keep throwing out those phrases, wireframing, prototyping. I find this is a super snappy and efficient way to handle, okay, my designers are making fairly rapid changes in the designs they're asking me to incorporate into my prototype application. Let me just run the command. I'm going to instruct it to pull over maybe a specific part. I know the header changed. I'd like to do that import now. Or maybe I'm just going to pull it in and say, reapply this to the home page. I'm not entirely sure what elements the designer changed. I want Builder to pick up on that context for me because it can actually analyze the layers and only make the changes necessary that I need in this regard. So this is the part that I just get super excited about the future and the potential for within project repositories. I will pause here. Josh, anything else you think we should cover from this perspective? And maybe let me actually do one thing. I know specifically for your team, I'm going to call this out that this is a private beta. And so I suspect that Josh would love for me to call out that we'd love feedback on this. If you see anything that's working really well or not working for you, I believe that your team personally reviews all of this to see if there's ways that we can continue refining and making this a more efficient tool.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you calling that out. Um, I think that we're proud about this beta and what the CLI is capable of. And I think that especially in context, if you're using, AI for a lot of other things right now, like if you're using GitHub Copilot or Cursor or something like that, using this tool is going to feel second nature. It's going to feel like it belongs in the workflow that you already have. If you're not using those tools, it's going to feel like magic.
To me, it's magic. I'm still hopping onto the Copilot train. I should be on the Copilot train. I'm getting there, boarding the train. Anyway, no, that to me, this is magic. I'm super excited to talk more about it. I know that we have, I think, one final slide to get through. So let me actually go ahead. I'm going to flip back into our view over here. And hopefully folks can see that. There we go. So we should have our outcome slides being shown at this point. So just kind of a wrap up here before we get into the Q&A portion is that what we showed today was that we could import this Cloudscape portal design into Builder and generate that ready to sync code. Josh actually showed a little bit of a fun and hidden method, which was very fast, the fast method. There is, of course, that quality using external large language models. And then we leverage the component mappings to overall influence and optimize the way that our designs turned out. And then lastly, we did show that private beta, which we can use the CLI command to make context-aware updates to our application. And if you do want access to the private beta, I believe one of our organizers will be dropping a form into the chat so that folks can fill out their own email and public API key for your builder develop space if you'd like that to be enabled for you. So Josh is going to be responding to a lot of form requests hopefully today with folks testing out this new functionality. Anything else you'd like to call on this slide before I let the dancing peanuts be transitioned onto the next slide?
No, I'm good. I think you covered everything.
Builder, the builder blobs. Oh, and we saved time. Lots of time was saved today. There we go. All right. So Q&A, let's see. I wonder if it would be useful for me to continue sharing my screen or if we just go through the Q&A itself. Let me stop sharing for a second. All right. So I see we have quite a few questions.
Yeah.
I'll just start what I see at the top. Does this only work for dashboards or any reason that part of the application was chosen?
I think we chose this part of the application because um, it's kind of a question we get, right? It's a question that people want to talk about is how do you do this with dashboards for internal applications? I think that using a tool like this for internal applications is kind of almost a no-brainer, honestly. But dashboards is just a really common use case for a lot of organizations in their internal apps.
And I think that's a good summary of that one. We do see a wide range of designs that people are trying to use. We also see folks just doing components sometimes if they're trying to do the design system emergence or creating that design system. So it doesn't have to be a screen necessarily, as Josh was saying. It could be a component or certain layers. Going on to the next question I see, is the plugin free or paid? What pricing tier do we need to unlock the code export? So for Figma, as long as you can install the plugin, which I know does adhere to certain Figma plans, our plugin is available for install. On the builder side, you can do the imports, and correct me here if I'm wrong, Josh, but we can do the imports. The only feature that's going to be enterprise gated is the component mapping.
Correct. That is correct.
See, that answered a
And it's
few.
it's
Okay.
quite generous, the number of code generations you can do.
I think the limit, I've been challenging people to hit the limit of code generations just because I'd love to see it. Okay, I see one more. Oh yeah, do you want to pick one, Josh?
Yeah. There was a question about for React Native for mobile, and that is one of the targets that we have for code gen. So you can do code generation into React Native.
Awesome. And then when can we add dynamic interactions to our components with Builder? When you click on this button, the image carousel should scroll. Is there anything? I believe that some dynamic or some interactive elements, if you are using the component mapping, as we were showing, should come over in their current state. But I'm not sure if there's anything more from a product perspective you'd like to add on that, Josh.
Yeah, actually, it'll come over with component mapping, but because we go to Builder as an intermediary, you can make changes to the design and make things interactive using the Builder visual editor and the visual editor AI when you have access to it in order to make additional changes, make things interactive before you go to code, with an understanding that coming from Figma, it's kind of a flat design, right? The interactivity isn't really there unless you're mapping components, but you can add that interactivity within Builder itself before you go to code to ensure that your code is going to encompass that interactive elements.
This should be a quick one, but is there a limit to the number of instructions one can add? I believe the limit is 10 custom instructions, right? Does that
Yes,
sound?
I believe
Yes.
so, but a custom instruction is line delimited. So every line that you put is actually a new kind of instruction. So you can add quite a bit.
And if you remember the accessibility instruction that Josh had, that counted as one instruction, but it had 20 different prompts within it, maybe more. And so if you do have those groupings, I would say think about it from that perspective. What's the topic? And then what prompts need to go underneath that topic?
Right. Yeah, I think we kind of
Uh,
answered that. Is it possible to make components with dynamic designs? Yes, that's kind of what we covered.
And can you customize the breakpoints? I see upper breakpoints mentioned. I believe for all three sets of breakpoints, we can customize what those should be on the visual side. So if you are looking at, different desktop sizes, if you've got, different sizes that your team uses for desktop to tablet to mobile, those can be customized.
Support for Material UI. So yeah, we support Material UI. The best way to do it is either through component mapping for your Material UI components, or to indicate to the LLM through custom instructions or a custom prompt that Material UI is being used. Obviously, custom mapping of custom components is the most foolproof way to ensure that it's going to work correctly. The LLM indication is more of a hint than anything else, but we've seen it be pretty effective.
Well, I see a couple upvotes on this one from Jeffrey. I'd like to answer this one. So can you show a workflow on how to integrate the inevitable client or designer changes without a full re-import? That's where I think this
Inevitable.
private beta, the CLI, I keep saying it, the CLI, I would encourage you to try that for the inevitable designer changes, especially the more subtle, perhaps changes that Traditionally, if you're a developer, maybe you miss a little bit of that, right? As you're kind of trying to work quickly with client designer needs. I think that doing the CLI flow and doing that delta from what's changed on the homepage would be very effective. And so that would be the workflow that I personally would recommend. Not sure if you think anything else might be helpful there, Josh.
I think you covered it.
Cool. Okay. Should we do, let's see. I'm looking
Oh, I
for, what
see.
else
I
is,
just saw lit and custom elements. I will say that today lit and custom elements are not officially supported, but that is actively in development as we speak. I'm a big fan of web components, so especially for your design systems.
oh, this is a good one actually for this group, especially from Joe. Do you have any tutorial or training for beginners using the tool, presumably? I mean, from what I've shared with others, as we're kind of expanding our content around training for using this, I've actually referred to the webinars with the step-by-step guides because one thing we're going to do after this webinar is share both the Figma design file and the GitHub repository that are open source that we use for this. So if you'd like to walk through with the mappings that we have, with the actual design file, with the actual repo, you can do so. And we do have that for the other webinar. We'll continue doing that during the Builder Lab. So I think that these are great tutorials. Yeah, I would recommend that personally. We do have documentation on our website as well, but I think sometimes being guided with using a new tool can be really handy. Oh, this is one that I hear this question a lot. Actually, Josh, I might defer to you on this one, but Storybook and Builder, we see teams using them together. Can they live together, and how does that look?
Yeah, so they can live together. You can think of it in a way where Storybook is really about documenting the components that you have in your library, and Figma is a way of documenting the components as they live in Figma, like a Figma library. Um, we can live within the repository that has Storybook, but at this point, I don't think there's a lot of value add with the conjunction of having Storybook with our builder Figma-to-code plus plugins. But there is not a problem with them living together. And we actually have a number of large customers who actually have component mapping within a library that has Storybook as well.
I think we've got time, what, 2 more minutes? So maybe we can pick a question apiece.
Sure.
I think, let's see. I am going to say, oh, here's one. Yeah, I'll take an easier one that I can knock up here. Now, how are design tokens handled in the code
Ah,
generation process? Yeah, I got
that's the one I was going to grab.
it.
Yeah. So
So,
we have
yeah,
documentation for this. So in the same way I showed how you can create mappings for components, we actually have mappings for design tokens as well. And the way that that works is that within Figma, you have a definition of the colors and the spacing and all the variables that are available from your design system library. And when those come out, you have a way of interpreting those, how they map to the corresponding code that you want to be represented. And it could be a SAS variable, it could be a CSS variable. There's a lot of different options, but that is definitely something that we support today.
I think this is one last important question to note. So I'll pick this as mine from David. Does it rebuild the entire repo on your CLI export or just the changes you made in Figma for that particular component? Two strategies today, right? Visual and CLI. I'll say from the CLI side, because I think that's what this question is focusing on, it does not rebuild everything within that file. It's only going to do the changes that have been made within that design file, according to also the context you give Builder on the integration. Now, for the visual flow, if you're reintegrating, it is going to generate the code for that design and potentially overwrite, potentially, and Josh, I will let you add
Unless
this note.
unless you
Yeah.
actually identify where that change was made and So in the question, it mentioned a component, a specific component. Now you could within the UI choose just that component and then run the export. And it would be able to account for just the changes targeted to that one location in the design. At that point, you're responsible for reintegrating it into your code base though, which is what we're fixing with the CLI.
There's more good questions in here. I know we're at time. Definitely would encourage folks to, reach out. We do have community forums if there are questions, but we'll have more webinars coming. And thank you all so much for following along on this one. We'll make sure to give a lot of resources out, but sign up for an account and put your public API key into the form if you would like access to that private beta for the CLI. We'd love your feedback.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for joining. And Alexis, thanks for joining me on this as well. It was a pleasure as always. And I hope to see all of you had filled out the form so that I have to send out lots of messages. So thank you.
Thank you all.